Blackballed, Blackballed,
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. My guest tonight, I don't even know where to begin because she has one of the most remarkable bios that I've ever seen from a Canadian public figure. She's an author. She's a former NDP MPP for Parkdale, which is my old riding, and I did used to see her around all the time, kind of intermingling with the community. She was really accessible like that, and I really enjoyed that. And she is also the author of this book. It's called The Queer Evangelist. And I would like to start this program by reading the following. Kids everywhere. The cops on horseback had broken up the anti-Vietnam War rally. I remember a lawyer saying, "Get their badge numbers," to no avail, and the demonstrators streamed into the downtown core. The anarchists, mostly kids, started smashing store windows. The Maoists, kids too, were waving the red book and shouting, "Running dogs of the U.S. imperialism." This completely astounded Saturday shoppers who thought the Maoists were referring to the kids running up the street. That's when someone started yelling, "It's the revolution." Instead, and perhaps regrettably, it was just a bunch of us socialist, hippie, peacenik, anarchist street kids. We were a tiny minority at the time in a vast capitalist state. I was a cynic. The Vietnam War was an abomination, no doubt, but the kids I hung out with in the street drug trade never believed for a moment the adult world would change. Not really. We all wanted to be William Burroughs, or Jimi Hendrix, or Janis Joplin. We assumed we would die young. It was far more romantic and more likely than revolution. Please welcome my guest today, Miss Cheri DiNovo. Cheri.
Yes, a pleasure.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good.
What a landscape you paint with that you can almost smell it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's a way that, you know, I've often romanticized. I was born in 1976, and Christy Blatchford of all people used to tell me that I was born 2 decades late because I used to romanticize journalism from back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you born?
Toronto. Astoundingly enough, I'm one of the few born and bred Torontonians. I was born at St. Joe's Hospital. That's not far from where I live now. And and I've only ever lived in New York for a couple of years. Other than here, I've traveled a lot. But yeah, this is my hometown.
You've been political though your whole life, it seems.
Pretty much, yeah. I've always been an activist. I never ever aspired to run for political office. That kind of happened at me rather than through me. The NDP came a calling and asked if I would consider running for them. I still had to fight a nomination battle, but that was after I performed the first legalized same-sex marriage. So there was a lot of press about that. My church was doing well. It was on Roncesvalles, which was in the middle of the riding that they wanted me to run for in the West End of Toronto. And so they figured I could win, and I guess they were right.
Those were the two Michaels, right? Michael Lerchner and Michael Scott, I think, or something like that. This is from memory, so I'm all...
No, not at all. No, the two Michaels came much later. That came after the law had changed.
Oh, okay.
This was two, and I'm going to sound all feminist now, but watching history be rewritten in real time with the men, figuring in for where the women should be. But it was I, a woman, married two women of color. Paula and Blanca were their names. One was from Colombia, one from Venezuela. They came to ask me to marry them, and our church board very bravely backed me up on this. And it was still illegal. So I married them using a system called the bands, which you could do instead of going to City Hall and getting a license. You can read it out. You can still use that. Churches can read, or faith institutions can read out 2 weeks in a row. On the bands form, there was no place for male or female. It just said bride and groom. So we just filled it all out. And sent it in to Thunder Bay, the registrar's office, which is what you would do with a city license too, and got back a marriage certificate. And then, of course, proverbial stuff hit the proverbial fan, and it went everywhere. And they threatened to take away my license at the provincial level. The church general did not back up my congregation nor me. And so got a good lawyer, phoned the CBC, got lots of press. And by the time anything happened on that file within the year, it had been made legal de facto. The Supreme Court of Ontario had ruled that not having equal marriage was against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And then it became legal shortly thereafter. So the marriage held, bottom line, it never went anywhere. And so that was the first legalized marriage in Canada. And I keep explaining this over and over and over, but
I'm sorry.
Anyway,
I knew I'd be educated.
Okay.
I knew I'd be educated in this podcast a little bit.
It's actually okay, but it is really interesting when you're as old as I am, to see history being rewritten. Especially when you were there, when you actually were part of it. So anyway, that's the fact.
Okay. I do want to go back though, because when you say that you were a street kid, can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah, I left home. I mean, a lot of queer kids did, because, it wasn't particularly queer friendly back in the day. And I came from a very dysfunctional home, very violent, very, very sort of eruptions of violence. I witnessed my quotes unquote uncle, who was really my stepfather, kill himself. I found the body when I was a kid. I saw lots of other scenes, not quite as dramatic as that, but it was not a safe place. Bottom line, was not a safe place for a variety of reasons, and the street was safer, and that's why most kids that I know hit the streets. We went, and in those days you could actually, on social assistance, rent a room and continue schooling, because you could live on social assistance. Not so anymore. But that's why I left. And all the kids that I met, we hung around Yorkville, and we slept on couches, we slept in the park, we crashed in anywhere we could. And that's how we got by. And we were, involved, most of us, I would say almost all of us, in the drug trade in some way, shape, or form. Because what are you going to do to make money at 15? I mean, the choices for a woman, other than being involved in drugs, were not appealing to me. So, so I sold LSD. That's what I did. Imported it and sold it.
They were powered by numbers back then if you were living on the street as a kid, wasn't there? Like, it was almost like I had talked to somebody who I used to live beside. It was a couple, actually. They met when they were both 13, and it was like the mid to late 70s, and that's how they met. And they met because there was some guy that had been roaming around the area near St. Lawrence Market, and there was kind of victimized or trying to victimize kids or whatever. And so these kids would hang out in groups of like 3 to 7 or something like that, like total kids, and that's how they survived. Was it like that for you as well?
Absolutely. We hung out, and some of those kids are still good friends of mine, kind of scattered around the globe right now. But the ones that didn't die, pretty high death rate. But the ones that survived, thrived, really did very well. I mean, one started the Vancouver Folk Festival, very active in the music scene out there. Another one became a dancer with the Alvin Ailey Ballet in New York, a girlfriend of mine, and still lives in New York, see her quite frequently. So, I mean, yeah, the ones that survived, thrived, and then there were a number that did not.
So selling LSD. So I remember when I was young, LSD was $5 a hit, and it just kind of stayed like that forever. It was
when I was young too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And there was I don't want to make it seem like I'm promoting psychedelics or whatever, but did you ever use any?
Oh, of course, because
okay,
of course.
Are you like me, where it's like, listen, like I don't want to encourage anyone to go out there and just do LSD all the time, but there are certain drugs that I have done in my life, and I'm a pretty open book about this stuff, that leaves a residue where it opens sort of a window when you do it, and then when you're sober again, that window kind of stayed open. And for LSD, it was a way to strip myself of my ego and look inward and not feel ashamed, but just sort of take note and try to figure out how to build a better me.
Absolutely.
Does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely. In fact, it was not illegal when I sold it. It was under the Food and Drug Act, so it wasn't legal, but it wasn't considered criminal. The criminalization came much later. And we used to import it. I imported it. My first introduction to the Bible was importing LSD in it, hollowed out Bibles from California. And some of the
Creative.
original tablets had, first of all, they had tablet making machines, so pretty
Mhm.
slick. But we're Sandos. We're coming from literal laboratories, because we forget that there was a lot of experimentation and research using LSD, which, by the way, is kicking in again, which is kind of
Yes,
interesting
the
for
psilocybin.
use. Yeah, for use with people with mental health issues. So, and we would divide each one of those tablets. That's how powerful they were into four, and sell each for $5 each. So,
Yeah.
a hit was still $5 back then. Hasn't changed much. But yeah, I mean, I've talked to many people who've said that they would never have, for example, entertained the idea of faith of any sort had
Mm.
they not done LSD, because it does teach you that what you think is common sense isn't so common, and sometimes isn't very sensible, right? That, you see that just with this little tablet in your system, the world shifts in a dramatic way. And so there it is. I don't recommend it either. I haven't done it in decades, and I don't think I ever will again,
No.
because it to me, and back then it was pretty powerful, and we did a lot of it, because of course we were involved with it, and pot, and it was mainly soft drugs in around the Yorkville area in Toronto. I mean, for the hard drugs you had to go kind of downtown, but I started developing a stutter from LSD. I mean,
Oh.
it does have. And I knew a number of people, and I've dealt with a number of street people since, where it really did, turn a switch somehow, and invoke an episode of schizophrenia, or
Mhm.
I knew many kids who ended up at what was then 999 Queen Street, now Cam H, or arrested, and some who died, not classically jumping off buildings or anything, but just because it can mess you up. It can mess you up, and I saw that.
Yeah, I think the whole everything in moderation thing really applies to psychedelics, because first of all, you have to double up if you're going to take it like within days of it, of taking it the first time. But just like I did, I still do it from time to time. I did it a few years ago. A friend of mine. But it's the same. That's why. Okay, so I'm gonna let people know that you may have seen me co-host the Dean Blundell show when Cheri was on, and we sort of touched on this a little bit, and it was one of the several reasons why I wanted to have you on today. But it was a person that I know who got it shipped here from Stanford, who knew the chemist who makes it still. And when I got it in the mail, I got three blotters or whatever, and they were with the perforated, and they were still together. And I just cut the whole thing in half and did a hit and a half. And I sit down, and this was like 3 years ago, I think. And I go online, and she's there, and she's like, "Oh, did it come yet?" Because she mailed it to me. And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." She's like, "Okay, before you take it, just let me tell you, like, just take a half, just like you're gonna just like." And I was like, "Oh shit." And it was weird because the doing a drug like that when you're a kid versus doing it when you're over 40 years old or whatever, it's almost like either doing it for the first time or a completely different experience.
Hmm.
And I was kind of impressed at how at how the drug hadn't really changed in a lot of ways, but since I had, the experience was different, and it made me reflect on being a good father and all this kind of stuff. Like, I don't think people understand. A lot of people don't want to do these drugs so they can party. They want to do these drugs so they can like meditate and
Hmm.
think and do things like that. And I think the psilocybin research that I think you touched on a little bit on the Dean
Hmm.
Blundell show is going to be super important for people with PTSD and with people
Yeah.
who are suffering from depression. And is it big pharma that has stopped that progress, like because they haven't learned how to synthesize it? Like, what do you think the reason
I
is?
think it's more the war on drugs insanity that has plagued, the West for so long. I hope that's beginning to lift. We look at examples in Portugal and others where jurisdictions have, stopped being idiots about this. But yeah, I think it was just part of the war on drugs, which just, got kicked in and never really left us, even despite, the fact that everybody knows that it does not work.
Mm.
They're still doing it, right? They're still doing it. So again, is there money behind it? Probably, but I think honestly, Big Pharma would probably just be as happy to make money from it as
Yeah,
to, counter it. So I don't think we can blame them for this one. We can blame them for lots of other stuff, but I don't think
cool.
that for this one. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly, I'm very glad. I mean, some of the peak experiences I think I've had in my life were on LSD, because for that very reason that you describe, is that, it really does just, open up everything. For me, I mean, I discovered what I really liked about LSD was just staying up.
Yeah, right.
Was just being up all the time and being, having that energy. So I moved from LSD to methadone, which was not a good move.
Mm.
But I certainly enjoyed that more. I didn't have to hallucinate anymore. All those pesky hallucinations. Like, I could just be up and beyond, didn't have to eat, didn't have to sleep. And so that finally ended my little foray into drugs, because I say it, as I describe in the book, I passed out on Bloor Street, or almost passed out, and thought, okay,
Yeah.
maybe the universe is telling me that I should stop doing this. And I realized I hadn't eaten in days, and got a chicken sandwich and changed my life.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so what were you doing then in the 80s and 90s? Like, take me through what it was like for you. Mhm.
Sure. So I got off the streets thanks to a government that, by the way, conservatives federally, provincially, municipally, which I constantly remind conservatives about, who actually taxed enough and paid enough. So social insurance, like welfare, was something you could live on. So thanks to that, I got myself back, did a high school equivalent at a community college, and then went to university, went to York. When I finished York, I got a job. I needed a job. I had a partner then, and got pregnant not too long after with my first child. And I got into the personnel business, headhunting business, affectionately called,
Oh,
and
wow.
discovered that the same skills I used in sales, both as a young socialist selling the newspaper and as a, as someone on the streets in the drug trade, worked just as well, legally, in fact, better. So yeah, so I worked for a number of companies, and then went out on my own. I kind of time tested routine, took most of my clients with me, started my own firm. And so the mid 80s, really, I realized all my material dreams. With a $5,000 investment, I was building $500,000 the first year. And so had the big house in the suburbs with a swimming pool and the Mercedes, and then went and invested in a box at what was then Sky Dome, now the Rogers Center,
Oh, wow.
and leased that out to client companies. And then the recession of the 90s, early 90s hit. So, and it was an all-woman firm. All the the people that worked for me were women, and we did very well. But things shifted quite dramatically in the early 90s with that recession that people may not remember. But for us, it felt equivalent to 2008. Probably not as dramatic for most people, but certainly in the business world on Bay Street, which is a university, which is where our offices were, it was dramatic. And so I see that as a blessing in retrospect, because I would probably never have stopped doing that.
Right.
I always thought that, if a job came across my desk, because we were headhunters, that I liked better than running my own company, that I would go for it. So when I walked into church, for a whole bunch of wrong reasons, I'm sure, and I saw then the minister, Ken Gallagher, great guy, still a friend, but retired. I thought his job is better than mine, pays way worse, but better than mine. One of the reasons I walked in was like my moods were dependent on my billings. And this I think will speak to a lot of people that are in business, have nothing but respect for entrepreneurs. I worked with many of them, but I mean, I had employees to look after and a family to look after. And, if the billings were great, my mood was great. If the billings weren't, I wasn't happy. And I thought, this is no way to live. There's something very skewed in this. And then the early 90s recession happened. And, I thought, well, now I'm going to have to do something else, either go up back into sales, twice as many clients for half as much business kind of thing, or here's an opportunity to do something different.
It's interesting because I know a lot of people that come from the streets or had rough goings, but street smarts, if you can find a way to get out of a rut and you have street smarts, that's really just people skills, right? Selling LSD from a Bible in Yorkville outside the pilot or whatever is probably a similar thing to telling people that they should probably hire this person because they're really good for the job. Like, it's almost the same thing. You're just, the widget is different.
Sales is
Yeah.
sales, you know,
Yeah.
marketing is marketing, where whatever industry you're in. Talking about the pilot, that was the first place that I ever had a drink. I think I walked in there when I was like 15, and trust me, I looked like I was 10. Like, I look at pictures, I mean,
You
and
still
no
look like you're like
questions,
37.
no
You're like,
questions, no ID, you know,
Yeah.
just served it up. You know, that was the pilot. You know, the pilot looked then and is now almost identical to what it is now.
I
Like,
know.
it's crazy. Some places never change. You know, they swept the floor. That's the difference.
But the history of that place, like, I always got an education on the history of that place whenever I went there, like in the early 2000s or whatever, because I lived close by. I lived in the annex, and it was just, that's where all the journalists used to go, isn't it? Like, when back in the day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And draft dodgers, draft resistors, I should say. And
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of Americans kind of made it their office that came up across the border then and stayed. Yeah, it was the home of a lot of kind of people that didn't have another home.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of artists, and yeah, it was quite the place. And you know, what was the band name? I can't remember, but they were like a Southern music band, kind of almost Dixieland stuff that played there every Saturday. And I think like they only stopped playing probably a few years back. I mean, they were
Oh,
like,
wow.
must have been their 90s because they were playing and I was like, it was very, very weird, you know, but yeah, it's definitely a Toronto institution for sure.
Was music a big part of your life? Like, did you go and see live music a lot, or?
No, it was a part of, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, this is an age thing for any age. I mean, music when you're young is kind of your lifeblood, like you live it, right?
Mhm.
Whatever the music is of your generation. And so we were no different, of course. I remember having tickets to see the Rolling Stones when they came to play at Varsity Stadium.
Wow.
Yeah, and I saw them later, much later, in a box at the Sky Dome, I think. But I sold them. Like, I was never big. I never, you know, I didn't go to Woodstock. Like, it sounded like, remember, I was a cynical kid. I was a drug
Mm.
dealer. Like, I wasn't real. I never considered myself a hippie. Like that whole kind of, you know, thing just kind of, I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy any of it back then. I still don't. I just thought it was very naive. And as the passage you read indicates, it wasn't me, and it wasn't the people that I hung out with. You know,
No.
that wasn't us.
The Varsity Arena show, wasn't that the one where Keith Richards got busted for heroin?
I think it was a little bit before that, but again, I didn't make it. I sold my tickets, which was silly. I
Right.
should have gone. But
You're a good
but anyway,
salesperson.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you can't help that. Okay, and then politics. When did you get the tap? The way you describe it, because like, you can't apply for a job at the CIA. They have to find you and tap you on the shoulder. So it was sort of like that, I guess. Eh?
It was. It's not always like that, but it was for me. I've always been an activist, but after I did that first legalized marriage, a lot of press. The church had gone from about to close in 2 years to, we had, you know, a full house, like probably 800 to 1,000 people on a Christmas Eve. So basically, a political party looks at that and says, well, she's got this little base, you know, and clearly got the press. She's a good candidate. And the NDP at that point had only 10 members at Queen's Park. In fact, they had 9. I think I became the 10th when I won. But it was a grueling campaign. I mean, had I known what it was like, I probably would have said no. But as it was, it took me a few months to say yes. And I got some great advice. I talk about this in the book, but you know, one person in the congregation said, you know, I wouldn't wish that job on my worst enemy, but I think you should go for it, Cheri. You know, so that was one piece of advice. And the other one, which I also liked equally, was being asked to run for political parties, like being asked to the high school prom by the quarterback. You know, it sounds very flattering, but when you get there, you have to spend the evening with a football player. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
both
Right.
of which were pretty prescient. I think they were both pretty accurate. So anyway, but there was a grueling campaign. Of course, they brought up my drug dealing, which was I never hid it. I used to preach about it because a lot
Yeah.
of the people in my church were people off the street with mental health and addiction issues. So they saw it as a story of hope. but of course it was used against me. Everything I ever wrote, I had one book out there called Queer Evangelism. That was my doctoral thesis that came out of California and had won an award in Washington. And that they quoted, lifted lines out of context from that. And, it was just really, really grueling. And the worst part of it, well, two of the worst parts of it were my kids had to live through that. And other people who run for political office will know this. And second of all, the people that were in my congregation who were still street involved thought, well, this is, it's hopeless. I'm stuck, right? Because if, they can come after her, they can come after anyone, right? It's one of those.
Was it Alexa Madonna that was the leader at the time?
Who federally, I'm just trying to think federally who it was. Could have been. Yeah, it could have been. I mean, provincially, provincially, I was provincial. Provincially was Howard Hampton, who the press always called Howard Who, but nobody knew who we were. And so when I got there, and I got a lot of press before I got there, and then I got a lot of press after, because the first bill that I introduced was a $10 minimum wage at a time when it was $8, and that got a lot of support across the province. And then I kept getting bills turning into laws. So I tended to get a lot of press, which was unusual for the little party at that time. Some of whom are still there, interestingly.
Did you ever think of running for leader?
Yeah, I did actually. I threw. I didn't. I don't think I ran seriously for leader of the federal party, but I did want to get my views out there. So I did run. But then sadly I had a health issue. I had a TIA, small stroke, and possibly two. And I thought, nah, I'm not going to do this. So it was really funny because I was on the phone trying to talk to Avi Lewis at the time. I was trying to convince him to run. He said, Cheri, you must be the only person that is running for a political position, trying to convince somebody else to run instead of you. I said, yeah well, there it is. Sadly, he didn't, but.
Yeah, him. I mean, him or Naomi Klein would be pretty good, I think.
They would be great, yeah. But
well, something happened. Sorry, I'm just thinking of it now. But there was remember, there was like an NDP convention. What was it, like 6-7 years ago or something? And that's when the manifesto came out, and they got a lot of bad press for calling it the manifesto because people thought it was going to be like communist or whatever. But and I was told by some insider back in the day that that the party was kind of split between pragmatists and radicals, and none of the radicals wanted Avi Lewis, but the pragmatists did. And I never really was able to confirm it.
No, I don't think that's true. I think I've always been on the left wing of the NDP personally, and my concern with the party, and this is completely evident in BC right now, but my concern with the party always was that they hate, there's this kind of spiritual law that you become what you hate. They hated liberals so much they were becoming them. So it was very difficult to tell the difference. The liberals would run left, then govern to the right. But I mean, often the liberal campaign sounded to the left of the NDP, which happened with Trudeau, right? And Mulcair, which is why we lost, because we blew it. So, I mean, and I think there's a whole bit of the party which was trying to become professional, quotes unquotes, and hired consultants and did focus groups and all of that stuff. And that's not the heart of the party. The heart of the party is an alternative to all that. So bit by bit, I don't know. I'm feeling very, very happy about what's happening provincially right now, which is that Marit Stiles, who I just interviewed on my show, is going to be the new leader, and I really like Marit. And I think some of the reasons I didn't run again are gone now from Queen's Park and the NDP. So I'm very positive about the future of the provincial party for sure. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, the NDP, is it difficult in party politics, to convince a large enough swath of the population to vote for you if you're kind of self-branded as staunchly left or staunchly right? That's a difficult road, isn't it? Isn't the genius of the concept, and I'm just saying the concept of the Liberal Party, the fact that they can put themselves in between those two groups on either side of the political spectrum and say we're more reasonable? Isn't there sort of an intelligent strategy in that? to be able
Well,
to secure more votes?
one could argue that in the past. I think that argument just falls flat right now. What we're seeing globally and what we're seeing in North America very clearly, I think, is that the center is dropping out. Is that we're becoming much more bifurcated. This has to do with kind of I think, the softening of people's interest in mainstream media and listening to shows like yours and others, and
I can't
being
believe
on
they're listening to
social,
this. Like,
yeah,
honestly, like, what are
and
you guys
being
doing?
on social media, right?
Yeah.
So we're all down our own rabbit holes in our own echo chambers, which you can argue with and say that's terrible. We don't talk to each other, and I would agree we do not talk to each other enough across the chasm, but. The reality is we're left or right now. And certainly if you're on social media for any length of time, you kind of see that. And whatever we may think of it, the center isn't holding. It's not holding anywhere in the world. We're seeing the same thing happen in France, for example. Macron, who could be argued was a centrist, kind of liberal, barely squeaked a win. And who really increased their vote share were left and right. We're seeing that in the States because there's only the two parties, difficult to gauge. But what you're certainly seeing is the rise of the right there, and with Trump, et cetera. And I just saw polling for the midterms, which looks scary. So you never know. So again, I think this is comes from a genuine place in people too, not just where they get their information, but people are really hurting. I mean. In my parents' day, you could own a house in Toronto on one salary and have a car in the driveway. And, for a lot of middle class, you could have a cottage too, maybe shared it with some relatives, right? Now you can't even on two salaries in the city of Toronto, and you're going to have a mortgage forever, and it's going to be ridiculous. This is the new reality, and the actual wages have gone from middle class to lower class, have gone down, 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 whereas the billionaires are getting richer and richer and richer. So we're seeing this huge divide, and that is reflected politically. It's reflected in those who either side with the billionaires or those who side with the person that's struggling to get by, and barely able to pay their rent. So I mean, this is the spectrum that the two sides reflect, and I think that's reasonable.
How much of that, the wage or the wealth gap, and and the sort of polarization, largely due to, I would say, the wealth gap. I was priced out of Toronto. My now ex-wife and my two kids. I mean, we were making what we thought was decent combined living, and it wasn't enough. It would be more than enough in anywhere else, but Toronto was just that bad. How much of all that is the unintentional consequence of I don't want to use the word globalization then, because that's what staunch right wingers use, but like free trade, the idea of our manufacturing being moved overseas and factories in places where they may have uplifted some people out of poverty, but just barely, because they're still only getting a few bucks a day. Like, how much of it has to do with that?
Well, absolutely. And I would say, I mean, we think about it very differently. I don't think of it as a global conspiracy as some do, but certainly multinational companies now have way more power than governments. So, you don't like what they're doing in your jurisdiction, they pick up their toys and leave, and they go somewhere else where it's cheaper and the labor's cheaper. We see this happening all the time, and that has consequences. And, we're also poor. We have to shop at Walmart. Well, guess what? It's Walmart that's making us so poor,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's sort of, this is the terrible treadmill that a lot of people are on and economies are on. And we don't have, and sadly, politicians are funded by these same people. I mean, whether you're a Democrat or Republican in the States, your money comes from Wall Street. It depends, what billionaire is backing who. So if you've got an oligarchy with billionaires running everything, wherever you are, where's the democracy there? Where's any kind of freedom that we would normally sort of want to uphold? So what it takes is really serious political backbone, and that's what we don't see a lot of, right?
Yeah, we don't. And it's also confusing for a lot of people. I consider myself fairly politically inclined, but when it comes to geopolitics, especially the economics of geopolitics, I'm a deer in headlights. I don't understand. I guess I can conceptualize, but I don't fully understand why the war between Russia and Ukraine is making my cost of living go up.
Well, actually, what's making your cost of living go up, and and it's called greedflation hashtag. It's, price gouging, when grocery prices go through the roof, and yet, all of our big grocery chains are making record profits and paying record bonuses. Why are our prices going up? Well, because they can, and they're doing. It's price gouging. Gas the same. Guess what? The Sauds aren't suffering. I mean, the biggest gas companies are making record profits. They're paying record bonuses. This is price gouging. Most of the billionaires got way, way richer during COVID, whereas most people got poorer. So this is the simple reality in which we live. And the only people that have a chance in kind of standing up to this are governments. And, most of those political parties are taking money from them. So that's our problem. I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, because the reality is, guess what, folks? They can't do it without us. So at the end of the day, and they're finding it like nobody's going to work for minimum wage if they don't have to. And so finding workers who will work, themselves into an early grave to fund a billionaire, people get angry and people say no and they stop. And yay, good for them when they do that.
Yeah, I look at things like you look at I'm in Toronto right now. I live in the Madawaska Valley, just outside the Ottawa Valley there, and I came here and I was looking at prices and I was just looking at the menus and on restaurants, and I was just like, this is insane. I lived here in 2016, and easily they've doubled, easily. Like for and I'm talking like if a Thai lunch, like a takeout thing that used to be $8.95 is now $17, right? And I'm just like, holy shit. And I don't really even blame the restaurant in a way, because their landlords are charging them $7,000 a month just to have that little spot, right?
Oh yeah, it's not a small business issue. This is a big business issue.
Mhm.
And we've all seen this. You go to the supermarket, and the reality is prices have gone through the roof and wages have not. I mean, I saw one little study that said that if our hourly wage, this is American, but said if the hourly wage had kept up with what CEOs in the C offices are making, the wage would be like $61 an hour. Like the minimum wage would be that. I mean, that's how the spread has happened. And that's how we've lost wage income and what it really buys. As I say, my parents could own a house in Toronto and a car on one income. Think about that. I mean, all those 1950s Leave It to Beaver. All the women were at home. Well, not all of them, obviously, but I mean, you could do it on one salary. That's inconceivable now. It sounds utopian when you talk about it now.
Yeah,
So
it
I
does.
mean, this is this is what I've seen in like one generation. So and it's simply politicians like rolling over for it's like donors, big donors.
What would the political will look like legislatively?
Well, it would look like, okay, so you're going to close your factory and put 1,000 people out of work and move it to Mexico. Great. Okay. See ya. We're keeping your factory and we're going to nationalize it and we're going to give it to the workers who are going to run it. And guess what? Some of those workers, and think of any industry that you're in. Honestly, the workers that do all the work in that industry, if you gave a few of them, the key to the to the CEO's office, I bet they could run it as just as effectively and a lot better than those CEOs. So that's what you do. You have political backbone, and honestly, even without doing that, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, I mean, I went to Sweden when I was in politics. So there, McDonald's was unionized, 85% unionization rate there. The average, we were fighting for $10. The average hourly wage there was over 20, and this was years back. It's a small country. At that point, it was about 9 million. Now it's probably about the same size as Ontario. And we can all think of huge, Swedish companies, Volvo, IKEA, Sony, so for a very small, so somehow they make it work. And they don't have homelessness. They didn't have poverty in our estimation at all. They had housing. They were building 100,000 units of affordable housing a year. When I was over there, called it the Million House Program. So I mean, now things have shifted a bit.
Now we have bucket beer.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay. I mean, the things are shifting in the Scandinavian countries too, unfortunately, in some ways. But the reality was like things that, university's free, you got paid to go to university. I mean, this is not utopia. This is what's happening in a lot of European countries. And we compare ourselves to the States. We forget There's a world out there that does things differently. So yeah, I would say I spent a month in Spain this spring, and it was just so refreshing to be in a place where there aren't, where there's some sanity that runs things.
Yeah. Is it a good time? Because I learned something recently that I was sort of surprised at, but then it seemed obvious. A lot of the people that have union jobs vote conservative now. And I was wondering, do you think it's a good time to start pushing unions again? Because it would be really interesting, especially federally, to watch someone like Pierre Poilievre, who all those truckers that he thinks he mobilized to go to Ottawa, or maybe he sort of did. A lot, most of them are unionized, plumbers and contractors, and they all tend to, like, not all, but a lot of them vote conservative. Do you think maybe it's a winning strategy for the left to start pushing unions and making people like Pierre Poilievre speak against them, even though a lot of his base are unionized workers?
Well, first of all, the convoy, when you look at who was actually in it, a lot of them were independent truckers. They weren't unionized.
Oh, that's right. That's
yeah,
right.
and
But nonetheless,
and bankrolled. Are you kidding? By millionaires, like millions went into the convoy. Still, some of it's unaccounted for, as we hear these days.
I distracted my own question with the convoy thing, but but still,
no,
I think a lot of conservative voters.
I hear what you mean, like construction. But here's the problem, and this is an educational problem, right? Is that, people like say, and I hear from, people who work in big oil and stuff, well, they're, don't believe in climate crisis. They're frightened for their jobs. That's what's behind this. And they think that by aligning their interests with the billionaires and the developers, or that if you side with them, the trickle down theory, some of the money will come to you. This has been disproven every single generation. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
What happens is that if you're, first of all, thank God they've got a union. But if you ally with the what we used to call the bosses, with management has a completely different agenda than looking after you. Their agenda is to make profits for the shareholders. It's not to put money in your pocket. So I mean, this is the problem, and it's a problem of education. It's a problem of the left, actually, that we haven't done a good enough job of educating. Kind of the whole classic "whose side are you on?" That we haven't talked to workers, that we haven't organized, that we've pretended to be liberals, that we haven't gone to our base and started to talking to folk exactly like that, and said, if you didn't have a union, guess how much they'd be paying you, number one. Yeah. Half of what you get. And that has hit the trucking industry, by the way, hugely. It used to be a very unionized industry, and now it's a lot of independent truckers barely keeping, gas in the trucks. So it's a problem. And in the oil fields, you think that this industry is going to go on forever? The big oil companies are even investing in renewables. So what you need to do is retrain in industries like that, because there are lots of green jobs. If the government was to invest in that, we put the billions that we put into oil subsidies into green jobs, those people could just segue from one to the other. But this is a problem, and it's a problem that the right wing capitalizes on, as if the billionaires have your best interests. I mean, think about it for a minute. Everybody knows that's nonsense. I have nothing in common with Elon Musk, and he's not going to help me if I default on my mortgage.
He did help me get internet in the sticks.
Well,
I do have
go.
Starlink, and it works really well. And honestly, it was costing me $300 a month in internet before I got his thing. So,
oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I put
You'll
money in
have
his
to
pocket.
share that information, James, with how you did that.
Yeah, well, it's easy actually. Bell has decided. Bell is so criminal. Okay, like I
worse than Rogers. I don't know.
Yeah, they are, because they own the infrastructure, and the infrastructure that they have where I live. There's all these, like, I don't know what they call them, like dark spots or something, where there's no infrastructure there to give me high speed internet. So you got to go through the cell tower, right? So I got to get this thing, and I was doing that for like 4 years, or 5 years, going through the cell tower. They won't give you unlimited data, even though there's only like 800 people that live in my whole town. But they'll sell data in bulk to resellers, who will then sell it to me. And then they'll give me what they call unlimited data, but then they'll throttle the service. And it's just like, So
Yeah.
you know, they're the reason why I had to go to Elon Musk to to go get my internet, right? But
Well, yeah, good for you. I mean, that's also a problem with the concentration of, remember there used to be antitrust laws and things. Remember those days?
yeah, barely.
And now we have nothing but trusts, right? Like we have huge companies dominating fields with little or no competition.
Speaking of that, I because I
Hmm.
knew I wanted to touch on this for a second. One of the
Sure.
most egregious things I ever learned was years ago when I found out, and it's not the same anymore. When Nestle, and I think you were in government at the time, when Nestle was paying $3.71 for every million liters of water that the company pumped out of the ground. When I heard that, I know it's different now. I think I have it right in front of me. Now they pay $503 per million liters of water, which is an increase of 13,500%, but it's still nothing. Why and where do deals get made like that? Where did this briefcase open to put in the face of whoever made this decision? Why did that happen? Isn't it criminal? Do you know anything about that file? Because
Well,
I am so angry about that. I'm
yeah,
still angry
well,
about that.
and the other thing is, of course, they put your basically what you could get out of your tap into a plastic bottle, and then the plastic bottle has a lifespan,
Yeah. Yeah.
beyond, our entire race, yeah. So a major contributor to the climate crisis and the death of our oceans. Well, it's basically graft and corruption, which is political,
Yeah.
which is, you entice some, small mayor in a small place, and they think, oh, you're getting all this money, and this is what comes out of it, at the end. So I mean, it's maybe not into your pocket, but it's into getting you reelected and into your town's pocket, and it's of course never enough. It's always a ripoff. So that's essentially what happens when those things happen. And the other reality is the privatization of things like water. Like water should not be private. Energy, I think, should not be private. I was just watching a documentary on the situation with, the huge electricity company in California that caused all the fires and killed people. I mean, the necessities of life should not be in private hands.
Mhm.
There's something very wrong with that.
You mentioned earlier that the Liberals in the last election, or not the last election, but in the 2015 election, sort of outflanked the NDP and appealed to a lot of left-wing voters. Where he's disappointed me as a prime minister. I don't have any. I try not to have any ill will for people that I think are probably good people, but they make political decisions sometimes that just blows my mind. Where do you think Trudeau has kind of dropped the ball since he became prime minister?
Well, because the way all liberals do. I mean, they run to the left and then they basically tend to sell out. So, we saw in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, privatizing hydro. You see him, with various scandals, going back. And it's kind of the old graft and corruption game. I mean, we used to have a joke at Queen's Park about the then Liberal government, and one of my benchmates said, every day is like every other day. It's all graft and corruption, and it's a good day when somebody doesn't get whacked. And at which point, my benchmate Peter Tabbins, who's a great guy, said to me, well, actually, when I was a city councillor, somebody did actually get killed in the underground parking lot or something at City Hall. I mean, this is what it's about. I mean, money just kind of goes out, and that's sad. And I want to be nonpartisan about it because I'm not a big fan of the Horgan government at all. And the problem is this is what tends to happen, and that's sad, and that's what's going to kill our planet unless we get our acts together and do something about it, because money does talk in politics. And yeah.
Yeah, he kind of, to me, he kind of, I don't even know. I feel like the outflanking of the NDP was completely artificial because it felt like he was placating the left on issues that really there was no heavy lifting involved. And a lot of it seemed to be like lip service to social issues, but not like, it wasn't like affordable housing it was like pronouns and stuff. Like he didn't.
Well, no,
you know,
what he's done, I mean, what he did, like, think about some of the promises that he made. He promised to get rid of the first past the post system.
oh, that
He
was the worst.
promised, he
Yeah.
promised that we would have a true democracy, which would really help us in this country, so that your vote actually counted. And then he promised pharmacare. Where's either of those things? Promised, he said. These are, this is like, this is constantly what liberals do. Tories do, like, yeah, I mean, it's not just one party that does this, but the sad reality is that when I look at Ontario politics, which I know kind of more intimately, I can say that I often use the example of Mike Harris, who I think almost completely destroyed this province in many ways, but he did what he said he was going to do, and this is horrifying. So what do you want? So you've got, you've got, the Liberals with, we've got principles, and if you don't like them, we've got some others. And then you've got Conservatives who want to privatize everything and, and give like drop taxes on the billionaires. And then they do, right? So, and then you have the NDP that isn't putting forward, I mean, I think the deal federally with the NDP was terrible. I think we should have got way more for our support for the Liberals than what we got. So there you go. So unless we really develop a backbone, somebody somewhere, please, we're going to be Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. No, those will be our choices.
I'm not trying to get you to throw anyone under the bus or anything, but do you think Andrea Horwath overstayed her leadership life?
Well, to be fair, she worked hard and she quadrupled the caucus from when I was first elected. I think
so did Kathleen Wynne had a lot to do with that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, should have been government the last election. And I think we could have been government. So I'll leave it at that, absolutely. I mean, I think that the major problem was we were just trying way too hard to be Liberals.
Any chance that you might be throwing your hat back in the ring?
No, none whatsoever. Although I am actively supporting Marit Stiles, so and I've made no bones about that. So I think she'll be all but acclaimed pretty soon because you have to register, I think, by December. So, but that's going to be a good move. And then we just need a good chief of staff. I'm all about people with principles in politics. And nobody wants a one-party state. We act like we do, but we don't. We really do. So I much prefer a principled person from another party than a careerist in my own. So give me somebody you can actually talk to that actually has an opinion, that's actually there for a reason and not just themselves. And then you can actually get something done.
So no politics. So drug dealing, perhaps?
No.
That'd be kind of crazy.
Long gone. No, I'm
wearing
a collar.
You're like a priest.
I got
you're
like
giving
the best
communion, and and every fifth communion is LSD. That would be kind of fun.
I got the best job in the world, No, but I mean, I wish them all well. I think that there's one thing I learned in politics is people don't go in it for the money because most of them are lawyers, could probably do better somewhere else, and people don't and aren't lazy. Nobody works harder than politicians if they're working at all. So there's that. But what we really would love from them is honesty and actually standing up for a principle. And I think that makes a good debate, and that makes a government. If you've got, and again, if we didn't have first past the post, but we built in more negotiation, more forced negotiation, I think we'd get better laws.
Well, I'm happy that you're happy where you are in life. I think that you would be a great candidate, but I totally understand why you wouldn't want to get into that arena right now. And your book is called The Queer Evangelist. And Cheri, it was awesome to talk to you. I hope you come back.
Always fun and always will. Take care, James.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
You too.
Cheri DiNovo. She's amazing. She's awesome. She was my Parkdale MP. And, I'm really thankful that she spent some time tonight because she makes a lot of sense. We didn't really get into the nitty gritty of issues all that much, but I'm sure that we disagree on a bunch and agree on a bunch, but she makes a lot of sense, and she's ballsy, and she's all these things. So I really appreciate her coming on the show today. I think I'm taking tomorrow off. And yeah, so we'll probably see you on Monday on Blackballed. Thanks for it.
Blackballed. Blackballed.